welcome to week 3. This week we have been learning about soups and sauces. And I'm gonna show you today how to make one of my favorite things, which is a lasagna bolognese, using one of the 5 mother sauces, which is bechamel. And then also a bolognese, which is a riff off of a basic tomato sauce. So it has a lot of steps. It's kind of an impressive dish. It's a lasagna, which you would think of as kind of basic, but because we're taking the time to add these extra steps, it's kind of a day's project, but the results are going to be amazing. It's a delicious recipe. So let's go ahead and get started. We have several elements that we're going to be preparing, and the first is the bolognese, so we'll start with that.
Okay, so the first step is going to be to make the bolognese sauce. And we've seen this trio of things before. This is what we call mirepoix, and this is going to be the beginning of our bolognese sauce. So very simply, I'm just going to kind of roughly chop up the mirepoix and then add it into my food processor. I'm going to pulse and basically just mince up the mirepoix. So we're going to chop up that celery. We're going to really quickly peel 1 carrot. We're going to use 1 stalk of celery. And since the food processor is going to chop up most of it for us, we don't need to do anything really exact. Got this leftover onion. I'm just going to cut that into smaller pieces. And then I'm going to go ahead and mix it in the food processor. The next step is we are going to saute the mirepoix with some of the meat that I'm going to be using. So I'm going to do my stock pot again, and then the 3 different proteins that I'm going to be using for the bolognese. First, I'm going to start with pancetta, which is very similar to bacon. It's a cured pork product that is very salty, and you can buy this already diced up, or you can buy a piece of pancetta and cut it up yourself. Then I'm going to be using a pound of just regular old ground beef and a pound of regular old ground pork. So step 1 is in my heavy bottomed pot. I'm going to be adding a tablespoon of just olive oil, and I'm going to let that heat up. And then I'm just going to go ahead and add all of my 3 proteins along with my mix of mirepoix. So and then that's going to go into the pot, and it's going to cook for about 25-30 minutes. I just want to make sure that I keep breaking up the meat, and I want almost all the moisture to be gone from the pan before I move on to my next step. Okay, so my meat has been cooking for about a half an hour, and the next thing I'm going to do is to deglaze the pan, which we learned about last week, with a little bit of wine. If you were doing this, you could deglaze with stock, since wine is not safe for school. But I've got a cup of wine, and I'm going to pour that in, and then scrape up all those fonds from the bottom that we learned about last week, which are all those little brown bits, and then use the liquid from the wine to scrape all that up and get that incorporated. And then I just want to cook that for about 1 to 2 minutes, just so that all the wine evaporates and gets cooked into the meat. Okay. Alright, so once I see the wine is all gone, next thing I'm going to do, and this is what makes this a bolognese, is I'm going to add some milk. So I'm going to add a cup of whole milk, and then I'm going to cook this for about 10 minutes until that milk really absorbs and all the liquid is coming out. So we're gonna let that sit for about 10 minutes. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes, and my milk is evaporated, and the last steps to making the bolognese is we're gonna add about 14.5 ounces, which is usually one size can. I bought the wrong size can. So I'm just gonna add about a half. I'm gonna use these whole peeled tomatoes. You could also do crushed tomatoes. And then I'm also gonna add 2 cups of chicken stock. And now I'm just gonna break up these tomatoes, and then we're gonna let this sit and simmer for about 2.5, 3 hours. And then I'm gonna let it chill overnight. And then come back to this tomorrow to make the lasagna. Okay, the next step is I'm going to be making homemade pasta, which is really easy. You may or may not have done this already in Culinary One. And I'm going to turn that homemade pasta into the lasagna noodles. So I'm going to start out here. I've got 3 cups of all-purpose flour. I've got 4 eggs, and I'm going to add about a half a teaspoon salt. So homemade pasta is super easy. It's one of those things that's easy and cheap to make, but a lot of people like to just buy it because it's also really easy and cheap to buy. So the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to add my flour in a bowl, and I'm going to make sort of like a little bit of a well, which is like a little bit of a hole down in here. Okay, and that's going to be where my eggs are going to go. Okay, I'm going to scramble up my eggs, and then I'm going to add them into the well. Okay, and now the key is to slowly incorporate the flour into the egg. And I want to do this really, really slowly with either a whisk or a fork, keeping the eggs sort of in the center like that, and then just as my fork is moving, I'm just grabbing from the sides a little bit of flour at a time. If I try to add everything together, it's not going to come together, and it's going to be a crumbly mess. And I know this from experience. So every little bit, I'm going to add a little bit more flour, a little bit more flour, and a little bit more flour until almost all the flour is incorporated. Okay, once it gets to this stage where I can't really be using my fork anymore, that's when I'm going to have to start using my hands. Okay, so I've got the bulk of the egg kind of mixed in so that it has some sort of a shape right here, but it's still very, very sticky. So I'm going to, trying not to lose any of those like solid egg pieces, I'm going to be kneading the flour, and when I knead, I'm just going to be incorporating some more flour. So like I said, I've got about 3 cups of flour in here. I'm probably not, it's not all going to get incorporated, and that's just the way that pasta works. Okay, we're going to have a lot of extra in here, and so as I knead, I'm going to fold and press. I'm going to be folding and pressing, and what I want is to get as much flour as I can so that, as you can see here, the yellow part, that's really, really sticky, and that's going to stick to my hands, and I don't want that. I want it to be pliable. I want it to be tacky, but I don't want it to be sticking all over to my fingers because I'm going to have to roll it through the pasta roller, and so you kind of want it to be almost like the consistency almost of Play-Doh. Okay, once it is really has this shape, I can actually start kneading it on the counter if I wanted to. Okay. Okay, so now that I've kneaded my dough, I'm just going to wrap it up in some plastic wrap, and I'm going to let it sit in the refrigerator for a couple hours before I roll it out. Sorry, my dog is absolutely insane, as usual. I could let this sit for a couple days in the refrigerator, but at the minimum, you want to let it sit for about an hour in the fridge. So we're going to wrap that up and then go back and check on our bolognese. Okay, the next step is I'm going to go ahead and make my noodles. So I have my pasta that I've made from earlier,
And if you refrigerate it, you want to make sure that after or right before you're about to use it, you're going to take it out of the refrigerator about an hour before. Next thing I'm going to do is cut it into 4 separate sections, and I'm going to be using my pasta maker or my pasta roller to create my lasagna sheets. Making your own pasta, like I said before, is super easy. It's really cheap. It is a little bit fussy. So if you want to skip this part and just buy lasagna noodles, that works as well. Okay. So I'm going to just be starting with 1/4 of my pasta at a time. I'm going to keep the other pieces of pasta wrapped up in plastic so they don't dry out. And then I'm going to go ahead over to my pasta maker and start making my sheets. Okay, so I've got my pasta maker all set up on the edge of my counter. Just go over this so you can see a little bit better. If you haven't used a pasta maker before, it's going to have this dial on the side that sets how thick you want to make your pasta. So again, I'm going to start with just 1/4 of my pasta dough. I've got a little bowl of flour here because it's still going to be, we talked a little bit about sticky and tacky. I want it to just be a little bit tacky, definitely soft, but I don't want it to be sticky. I don't want it to be sticking on my hands. I don't want it to stick on the inside of my pasta machine. So I'm going to keep some flour here. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do whenever you're making pasta is you're going to start at the widest setting. It basically has 2 cylinders that are rollers that's going to make the pasta increasingly thin. So I've got my hand crank right here. Okay, and first step is I'm going to put a little bit of flour on both sides. And on this pasta machine, the widest setting is actually 0, and then the thinnest is a 10. So I'm going to put it through one pass. And then the next step is I'm going to fold it in half and then put it in the opposite way that I folded it. Okay, I'm going to do that one more time, fold, and then pass through the opposite way. Okay, and now my goal is to just get long sheets. Okay, so I'm going to try to get them as square as possible. So I'm going to kind of use my hands to just shape it a little so that I get them to be long rectangles, just like a normal lasagna sheet would be. And so I'm going to keep passing this through, increasing in number on my dial, making each pass a little bit thinner and a little bit thinner and a little bit thinner until I get one long sheet that I can cut into 4s. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my other pasta sheets. Okay, so the next step is I've got all my sheets of pasta. So I've got 16 sheets that look just like this, okay? I've got a pot of boiling water, and then I have an ice bath. So I'm going to take each sheet, and I'm going to boil it for just a couple seconds, and then I'm going to immediately dump it into the ice bath to stop cooking, and then I'm just going to let them kind of cool on a cookie sheet off to the side. So here's our first sheet. And since it's fresh pasta, it really doesn't need that much cooking time at all. I also don't want it to kind of start to fold or cook and wrap itself around the other side. Ooh, got some water on there. Okay, so then I'm going to dump it into the ice bath so it stops cooking. And each one of these is going to be really, really thin, which is great because this lasagna is going to be layered. So it's going to have 8 layers, and 2 sheets is going to be 1 layer. So when it starts to kind of fold, I'm just going to take it off like that, and then I'm going to lay it down over on the side. And now I'm going to repeat that 15 more times. Okay. Now what we're going to be doing is making our bechamel sauce, which in a traditional lasagna, this is going to take the place of if we would mix together ricotta, cheese, maybe with some egg and some Parmesan. So bechamel is one of the 5 mother sauces. Very simple ingredients, very easy to make. All that it is a mix of a roux and milk. And a roux, R-O-U-X, is a base made of butter and flour. And then to that, we're gonna add some warm milk, a little bit of nutmeg, a little bit of salt, and it's gonna give us just like a real basic creamy white sauce, which is gonna be one of the layers for our lasagna.
Okay, so the first step in making my roux is going to be to warm up some milk. So right here I've got 4 cups of whole milk that's warming up. Remember, when we're working with dairy, we want to use a low heat, especially when you have a high fat content milk, like I'm using whole milk. So I'm going to have this at about a medium-low temperature because I don't want to scorch it. Okay, I definitely do not want to burn and have the flavor then of that burntness seep into the milk. Okay, so while this is warming up, I'm going to start the roux. Okay, so a roux is going to be a base thickener. You could use this to thicken soups, sauces, gravies, etc. So I've got 5 tablespoons of butter that I'm going to go ahead and melt in a heavy saucepan, and then I'm going to use a whisk, and I've got a 1/4 cup of flour measured out. So the first step is to wait for the butter to melt and become foamy. Okay, now that all my milk is incorporated, I'm going to bring this to a boil. Once it starts to boil, I'm going to turn it down to a simmer, and then I'm going to let it thicken for about 10 minutes. After that, I'm going to add a little bit of pinch of nutmeg for flavor and a little pinch of salt, and then it's going to be ready.
Okay, so the next step is I'm going to assemble the lasagna. I've got my bechamel, I've got my noodles cooked, my bolognese is warming up, and I got my oven preheated to 350. So I'm going to take my lasagna dish and I'm going to coat it with butter so that nothing sticks when we are done cooking. Okay. All right. So we got butter all around the sides, and then I'm going to start with a little bit of bechamel, and then I'm going to add noodles, and then I'm going to add bolognese, and then bechamel, cheese. Forgot the cheese. We're going to add Parmesan cheese in between. So bechamel, noodles, bolognese, cheese. Repeat. And I'm going to do that 8 different times until I have this beautiful layered lasagna.
Okay, sorry, the lighting's really bad. So here's the bechamel. I'm going to start out with just a 1/4 cup. That's going to be the first layer, and that's just going to be the first thing that we lay down so the noodles don't stick. All right, these are my cooked noodles. It's very hard to see because of the lighting. I'm going to lay down 2, and they are definitely a little bit thick. They're going to overlap. Okay, so I've got 2 noodles, and then I'm going to add about 3/4 of a cup of the bolognese, sort of all around the layer evenly. Okay, get that all the way over to the edges because I want these to be nice even layers because there's so many. I don't want to have like bites that don't have everything, all the components. Okay, all right, then I'm going to do a little bit more bechamel, about a 1/4 cup. Scatter that all around, and then a little bit of cheese, and then repeat.